everyone, this is Sarah at the Catholic Homemaker. Today I want to review a book called The Well-Trained Mind, and it is a homeschooling curriculum book authored by Jesse Wise and Susan Wise Bauer, and it is a guide to classical education at home. Just so you know, I have been considering homeschooling our children seriously over the past several months to a year. I've been thinking about it years prior to that, but this is the first time I've been really seriously considering it. And there's so many reasons I am, but the number one reason is that I want my husband and I to be the ones to teach our children our values and the Catholic faith. And it's just really hard to do that if you send your kids to public or private or even Catholic school, unfortunately, sometimes. So that is my number one reason. And I joined a Catholic homeschooling co-op in our area last year. And one of the moms I've been talking to said that the reason she's homeschooling her kids instead of sending them to a good Catholic school that they have available to them is because she said it's already going to be hard for them to live and keep their Catholic faith. And so we want to make it as easy as possible for them. We want to take away as many obstacles as possible. And I said that I could completely relate to and understand that because that's exactly how I feel as well. And just, it was another convincing point to me to homeschool our girls. And so jumping into The Well-Trained Mind, it is a really great template, great starting book for people like me who are very new to homeschooling and you don't even know where to start. When I joined the co-op and even before that, I had been looking into homeschooling, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. There's so many different curriculums that you can choose out there. What do I do? And one of the moms from the homeschooling group, she let me borrow this book, The Well-Trained Mind, and a lot of them reference from that book for good reason. I will get into that later in the video. And it's just, even if it's an excellent overall curriculum for anyone who wants to homeschool, and it can be tweaked. So as a disclaimer, for anybody who's Catholic, the author is Protestant, so you would want to choose your own religious texts, whatever that may be. And there are plenty of books out there for homeschooling written for Catholics that you can reference to buy for Catholic textbooks or Catholic books to educate your children on. But just so you know, the author is Protestant, and I was having a discussion with one of the moms last week about this as well, and she also told me you want to watch out for the historical textbooks or books that she recommends because since she is Protestant, the books would be from that perspective sometimes. It depends on what it is. And we want to be teaching our kids from a Catholic perspective. And so, again, there's plenty of books out there if you're not sure where to start. And one of them I can recommend below. So the reason this book really fascinated me was because it breaks the book down into 3 different sections or stages of learning for your children. It has a whole curriculum from preschool all the way up through 12th grade, but it breaks it down into these stages because it is teaching the classical education known as the trivium. And those three stages are the grammar, logic, and rhetoric stages. The grammar stage is from, I guess you could even say before the preschool years up until 4th grade. The logic stage is from 5th grade through 8th grade, and the rhetoric stage is from 9th through 12th grade. And in the grammar stage, you're filling the children with all kinds of facts because young children really love to memorize things, and that's forms their foundation of their learning. Because if you don't get this foundation of their learning right, it makes it really difficult for the rest of their education and into their college years and into adulthood. So it's really important to emphasize that memorization in those early years and not to move too quickly on into the logic or rhetoric stages. The logic stages, the author gives a great example of the War of 1812, where you can teach them children about the War of 1812 and historical events before the logic stage. But once they enter that logic stage, they start to ask questions like, why was the War of 1812 fought? And then when you get into the rhetoric stage, it builds on the first two stages, and you're finally learning to write and speak and to have your own originality, essentially. And another thing that really fascinated me about this book was the author talks about her own experience homeschooling her own children. I believe it was the year 1970, and she pulled her children out of public school. And if you think it's radical to homeschool now, it was very radical to homeschool back in 1970. It was just really unheard of. But it's becoming more common and more popular nowadays for so many different reasons. But she talks about her own experience, and the school system was just really terrible at that time where she was, and she just didn't see any other option. And she tells of her experience with one of her children, who is one of the authors of this book. And this child got a full scholarship to her college, and at the age of 17, it was awarded to her for being a national merit finalist, and she worked summers for a good salary as secretary for a legal firm. I'm reading this directly from the book now. Her college chose her to spend a term at Oxford as a visiting student. After college, she completed a Master of Divinity, a 3-year theological degree, and then a Master of Arts in English Literature. She reads Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and Aramaic. She has a thriving career as a writer. She writes radio scripts for a national news commentary and articles for several national magazines, and has published 2 novels. She also teaches literature at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. I mean, that's incredible that her children do. She goes on to go into so many other details with this one particular child, and how she scored so high on the SAT, all these different things. And then Susan, her child, actually talks about more of that experience in the next chapter, and how when she became a professor and she was teaching freshman students and asking them to write papers, she found that they just did not have the proper foundation for writing, and that's why it was so difficult for them to do these basic things, because unfortunately this type of classical education is no longer taught in public schools. And the mother, the author, talks about how she went to school back in the 40s and 50s, but her aunt and uncle, when she came home, would actually teach her more of the classical education that they learned, and they only had an 8th grade education. So it's just really impressive about the trivium, this classical education, and just how it used to be taught as a standard to us, but now that we have the school system, it's no longer taught, unfortunately. And so a lot of us are not getting that good foundation anymore. And so that was just another convincing point to me why homeschooling is better nowadays. So moving on into the book itself, it's just a really great template, as I said, because it takes it through those 3 stages of the trivium and breaks it down by each grade level, even into the preschool years. Obviously, as a preschooler or a kindergartner, it's not going to be that complicated what you're learning. And even before that, she recommends that you just read a lot to your kids. And I've been doing that since birth with my children. I've been reading them books, and my oldest especially really loves reading. She's always asking me to read books to her. So that's one of the keys to getting your kids to love to learn or to read, is to read to them from the beginning and read to them often. And there are experts out there who even say, like, keep on reading to your older children even when they're really good at reading, because they still like being read to. Now, they don't need to be read to as much, but it is important. And so in each section of the book, she breaks down her recommendations for each grade level to teach, the different subject matters to teach them, how long you should spend on each subject matter, and the total amount of time recommended per day to spend teaching the child, or how much they should spend learning each day. So at the kindergarten stage, it's only around 45 minutes. And this was a crazy concept to me before reading the book. I guess right before reading the book, because one of the things I always questioned about homeschooling is I would see homeschoolers and it seemed like they weren't ever doing any work. It seemed like they were just going to the playground to play and going out with their parents and doing all these things. But really, we don't see the full picture just observing people here and there. We're just seeing a small snippet of their life. And the reality is, I and all of us were conditioned to think that it's necessary to spend 6 or 7 hours a day in school in order to learn. But in reality, it isn't, because there's so much time wasted in between those hours. If you think about it, there's time spent with standing in line with the teacher, trying to get your children, your classmates or your children in your class to listen to your instructions, and sometimes to have to make them behave in class too. And you're teaching a room full of 30 or more students sometimes. And sometimes you're having to create busy work for them so that they have something to do all day. Now, with homeschooling, you don't have to create all that busy work, and you don't have all those other time wasters as part of like those 6 or 7 hours. So that's why it may not be necessary until you're maybe in the high school years. You're going to need up to several hours a day because you're studying a lot more subjects, and you're studying them more in depth than you ever did. And you're working on a specialization during those rhetoric years. Whereas in especially the grammar stage, you're not needing nearly as much time for learning. It is important to learn, and it increases, the amount of time increases by the grade level, but it's not like a mandatory 6 or 7 hours a day plus homework on top of that. So I like the efficiency of that, and how if it's your family, you can make your own schedule. There's homeschoolers I know in the group, and some of them, they just follow the calendar school year, and some of them actually do like a year-round thing, so they teach them all the way through the summer because that's what works for their family. So I like the flexibility of that. I don't know how I'll do it for our children, but it's nice to have that flexibility. But it's just a really interesting point that I think we've all been conditioned to think that it's so necessary to have your children in there several hours a day. And I thought that because my entire life I was in public or private school. So I'd love to hear what you all think, what your experiences are. Oh, and by the way, there are textbook recommendations at the end of each chapter and throughout the book. So it's a really excellent book overall. I will probably get my own book when the time comes. But I hope you all have found this video to be helpful. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Hit that notification bell for all notifications. Please subscribe to my channel. And again, let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time, bye.